Well, hello again, and I hope you had fun and fruitful time thinking about your friendship with God in that breakout session. So, in this second half, what I want to do is to look at some of the things that we need to give if we're going to develop good friendships. And as leaders, of course, I think, and I've been saying that in the first half, of friendships are really important. So, number 6, as we proceed, is real friendship needs time. A spiritual writer who I very much enjoy, I don't think he would call himself a classic evangelical, but I love his work, John O'Donoghue, and he wrote a book of blessings. I might even quote one of these at the end to you. And he wrote this: most people are enduring a marginalized isolation. One of the great obstacles to modern friendships is the religion of rush, as he calls it. People are rushing all the time through time, but friendship takes time. Aristotle said, wishing to be friends is quick work, but friendship is a slow ripening fruit. Perhaps the most significant reason is because it takes a long time to make a friend. I've already hinted at this really, but it's not surprising that research indicates that the number of close friendships we can healthily sustain is about 12. And of course, this is exactly what Jesus did. He modeled having special friends, but he had lots of different levels of friends, as I said earlier. But the 3 were his particular intimates. It's also worth noting that he had many women friends too. I think I may have quoted this already, but a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And today we talk a lot about investing in relationships, and I wonder sometimes why we use this banking term. Is it because we know instinctively that there's no return without investment? Or to use Jesus's words, give and it will be given to you. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. That's Luke 6:38. Time is in fact far and away our most precious commodity, though you'd never know it from the way we treat it. And real friendship takes precious, irreplaceable time. It's also the only thing we have that we can't replace. So if we aspire to deep friendships, we've got to reckon with the cost, but know that every minute given to such friendships is worth its weight in gold, worth its time in gold. And it's very difficult to do this in a culture which practices the religion of rush. That is one of the reasons, I think, why true friendship is becoming a rarity. So many options for us all the time. But I also think that it's why those of us who pre-existed the world of the World Wide Web and the internet have something to contribute to those who were bathed in its amniotic fluid. My caveat for this is that, of course, I'm not against the sophisticated technology that we live with. It's got many benefits, and in fact, it can mitigate loneliness and isolation if it's rightly used. C.S. Lewis said an interesting thing about friendship. In friendship, he said, we think we've chosen our peers. In reality, a few years difference in the dates of our births, a few more miles between certain houses, the choice of one university instead of another, the accident of a topic being raised or not raised at a first meeting, any of these chances might have kept us apart. But for a Christian, there are, strictly speaking, no chances. A secret master of ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you, can truly say to every group of Christian friends, you have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another. The friendship is not a reward for our discriminating and good taste in finding one another out. It's the instrument by which God reveals to each of us the beauties of others. So really he's saying that God chooses our friends for us in a way that is hard to kind of identify, I suppose. So friendship needs time. And then real friendship needs courage, because real friendship demands the courage to know and to be known. And as a friendship grows in depth and familiarity, of course, our flaws and theirs become apparent. And of course, this is the point at which many potential friendships flounder and fade, because something goes a bit wrong and we think, no, I think I'll back away. I'll back away from the vehicle. I won't go there. But if we have the courage to face and accept their flaws and our own and keep pressing into the friendship, resisting the temptation to let fear make us back out of our commitment to it, I think we finally come to be rewarded with something true and deep and invaluable that gives us great joy. And then real friendship needs vulnerability. A real friend is a place of safety where we can reveal who we are and we can acknowledge the darker parts of our history. If we do friendship well, I think our friendships will be one of the most important sources of help for us as we battle our demons and pursue Christ-likeness. Jesus was so vulnerable at Gethsemane, and he modeled vulnerability in all sorts of different contexts, but it was in the Garden of Gethsemane that he openly showed his need of his friends. In Luke's account of this, it talks about how he sweated and his sweat was like drops of blood, and how he was in great anguish. It uses the word anguish. And he modeled vulnerability in other places too. At least twice a year, I meet with two friends who I've known for about 40 years, and we are able to open our hearts about literally anything. I think the only subject that's really off limits is our husbands, but if one of us was experiencing genuine pain in our marriage, I'm absolutely certain we would talk about it. We cry, we pray, we laugh, we talk together for 36 hours or so, often sitting around the breakfast table in our pajamas for the whole morning. And very importantly, I think we can absorb disagreement. There are things we disagree with with each other quite profoundly on. But because our love for each other is decades old and deep, this doesn't matter. And I think it's very urgent. You've often heard me say this. It's very urgent for us really to learn to agree to disagree agreeably. I also have a prayer group. I've been using Zoom for 5 years. I'm kind of forerunner with Zoom on a prayer meeting that I have with 3 or 4 other girls around the country in different places. And we have just become such deep friends and such precious friends through meeting together over these years and praying together. C.S. Lewis, again, famously said, and most of you will know this quote well, I'm sure, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. And then he talks about how you can lock your heart up, but how it will kill you. And that's in the 4 loves again. Every one of us needs friends with whom we can be vulnerable. Not very many friends. We don't need to, spill our guts in front of lots of people, but we need a few close friends with whom we can open up about our innermost struggles and our wounds and unashamedly ask for help. I think we often hide where we're really at because we feel kind of ashamed of what's not going to plan in our lives. And I think that can also be more of a difficulty for Christians because we feel we're meant to be like Jesus, which we are, but we feel our lack more acutely. And someone has called when we fail to open up to anybody, someone has called it broken secrecy. Now, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that we can't pretend that making friends is risk-free, like the friendship I mentioned that I rushed into and that went wrong right at the beginning when I arrived here at St. Aldates. And Jesus, again, is our model here because he was a close friend with Judas, who betrayed him. And every gospel records this happening. Matthew 26, friend, says Jesus, do what you came for, as Judas comes to deliver him up for the crucifixion. That deep friendship between Jesus and Judas is very challenging for us as Christians because it fulfilled all the criteria for an intimate friendship, but it still proved unsafe. So we can't guarantee that all the friendships that we have are going to succeed forever. We can't rule out the risk of betrayal. because as humans we are flawed and we fail. But I still think that investing in deep friendships and, exposing our inner beings is well worth that risk. So courage, time, vulnerability, and real friendship will include healthy conflict, even more difficult really. But if we have a real friend, it involves telling the truth and challenging. Now, I'm not suggesting that we challenge people right at the beginning of a friendship. I think there's a level of intimacy that needs to intuitively be reached and recognised by both parties before we can permit ourselves mutual challenging and intimate questioning. But real friendships include these things. Proverbs speaks often of the wisdom of accepting discipline and correction. In chapter 15, for example, he who listens to a life-giving rebuke will be at home among the wise. He who ignores discipline despises himself, but whoever heeds correction gains understanding. And we need friends who love us so much that they're ready to risk offending us. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. We have to have conversations that matter, as we call them, and live through times of reconciliation. Just an example I think of is a really difficult conversation that led to a kind of explosion with some fellow leaders, and nothing to do with St. Aldates at all, and was very difficult for a little while. But we had complete and utter reconciliation with this couple, and now are very able. We're in textual communication, and the friendship has been re-established. I think when you have a conflict or a disagreement, and you move from there to forgiveness, and forgiveness leads us into healing, and healing leads us into a deeper relationship, and that is what happened with us, between us and this other couple. And Charlie also referenced a wonderful reconciliation that we have experienced with someone, again, with whom it was very difficult many, many years ago. But the reconciliation and the times that we spend together and communicate with each other are so, so sweet now, much stronger, really. I think it's when conflict comes that it determines whether the friendship is going to be real and lasting and will lead to forgiveness and healing, or not. And of course, that doesn't always happen, but it's something to pray for, to hope for, and to work for, and to have the courage, if we've been in a conflict, to approach a friend and ask for forgiveness. It's often very hard to tell who's wrong and who's right, and it's usually a mixture of both. And so it never hurts us to ask for forgiveness. So courage, time, vulnerability, conflict, and then real friendship refuses competition and comparison. A classic example of this is in John chapter 21, when the disciples meet the risen Christ. And Peter is very interested in what's going to happen to John. And you can kind of see the competition there. Oh, is he going to get to stay with you? What's going to happen to me? Lord, what about this man? This is after Jesus said someone's going to lead you where you don't want to go. What about this man, says Peter, pointing at John, we imagine. And Jesus just says, what is that to you? If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? So real friendship refuses competition because it's based on love, really. And so why would we want to compete with somebody who we love? I think it's very natural to compete, but we need to recognize competition in ourselves and comparison. Comparisons are odious and they are destructive as well. I have a friend, I trained as a bereavement counsellor, and I know you know this, most of you, with Cruise, with the organisation Cruise, and I became very good friends with three girls who trained with me, and we are now in a book club, and one of them was a TV producer and worked a lot with someone who's quite famous. Some of you may have heard of her. She's called Jenny Eclair. And Jenny Eclair gets a lot of publicity. There's often articles about her in the media, written and radio, etc. and my friend Judith isn't always mentioned nearly so much. They produced I think it was a theatre show that was toured around the UK called Grumpy Old Women, because they are about my age. And they also now do a podcast together called Older and Wider. But Judith has never shown the slightest bit of competition with Jenny, even though Jenny has so much more attention across the nation. And it's a very sweet thing to behold. And it makes her a very good friend, of course. So lastly, real friendship can last a lifetime. I found this quote, which is silly really, but I thought it was funny. A true friend is someone who thinks that you're a good egg, even though he knows that you're slightly cracked. I thought Simon would probably enjoy that as a quotation. One of the things I want to say about friendship is that we can, of course, have really good friends with people who are not Christians, because all the principles that I've been outlining here are universal and they apply irrespective of a person's stance on faith. We ourselves have really close, long-standing friends who wouldn't call themselves Christians, but we love them as we love all our friends, and we actually do confide in them quite a lot because they also bear the imago Dei. They also are made in the image of God. Whether they recognize God or not, in a sense, doesn't really matter. It does matter, but it doesn't matter. And our friend Nick, who we were at university with 40 years ago, has just become engaged for the second time because his first wife died of cancer about 8 years ago. And we're just overjoyed for him. And he's just a very, very dear and precious friend. And we talk endlessly about God, about everything. So far, he hasn't come to faith, but we will never give up, I don't think. And then the girls I referenced who I trained at Cruise with, these are becoming quite deep friendships as well. I think it's important to say also that some friendships are for a season. My example of this is Ruth and Orpah in the book of Ruth in the Bible. Ruth, of course, remained after the husbands of Ruth and Orpah both died because they went to Moab. Lots of reasons behind all of that. And then Naomi, as you know, goes back to Bethlehem at the barley harvest time, and then Ruth becomes the ancestor of David and then of Jesus, and is an important addition to Jesus's genealogy. But Orpah left them at the time when Naomi and Ruth went back to Bethlehem, and Ruth stayed. And I think Orpah really was what you might call a seasonal friend. Sometimes it's really hard to let go and to recognize that a friendship's coming to an end. It requires courage too. And it's a lot more complicated than unfriending someone with a click on Facebook. So friendships can last for a lifetime. I just want to end with a story that Eugene Peterson recounts about Martin Buber, the great Austrian Jewish philosopher who was famous in particular for his work on relationships, summed up in his book, I and Thou. It's recounted, Peterson says, that Buber was once at a meeting during which somebody exclaimed about the wonders of meeting others across racial, language, and religious boundaries. And Buber stood up and replied, yes, that meeting another was a great thing, but not the greatest thing. The greatest thing any person can do for another is to confirm the deepest thing in him, in her, to take the time and have the discernment to see what's deeply there, what's most fully that person, and then to confirm it by recognizing and encouraging it. In other words, friendship isn't really just about meeting someone, it's about seeing someone. In Genesis, Hagar, if you remember, God says, I see you. And do we see people see who is really there? I think seeing the person, seeing who is there, this is the stuff that lifelong friendships are made of. But as leaders, it's important that we have friendships that are solid, that are long-lasting, and that will be there, people who are there for us in the difficult times that we, all of us, go through from time to time. So that's really the end of the content, as it were. And I want to suggest, before we go into our breakout rooms, that this is a good time as summer comes, and we're probably, most of us, going to have a slightly quieter August. At least I like to believe that and hope it. And it's a good opportunity to review our friendships. So I want to suggest that we take all of these 4 weeks, but this question of friendship away, and audit our friendships over the summer. And perhaps as you do that, you can think of friendships that you know are lifelong, but sometimes the painful truth, and a thought can trigger an actual physical pain, can be that as we listen to these things about friendships, we think, well, I'm not sure I do really have this kind of friend. I'm not sure I can identify with this level of friendship. And it may be for some of us that there's a friendship vacuum in our life. I've been talking about how scarce, really deep friendship is, I think, in our culture. And you might be asking yourself, well, who actually are my friends? And are they really the kind of friends we've been talking about here? This can be a really hard thing to admit, even to ourselves. But I want to really encourage you, if that is true for you, the first step is to humble ourselves and admit difficult truths and ask for help and pray. We all know that there is help in this church if we're struggling. We know that there are people who are really ready and longing to help us and to help each other. So just as we go into our breakout rooms, I'm going to read John O'Donoghue's. I'm going to risk reading John O'Donoghue's blessing for friendship. And you can take it or leave it as you wish. But I really want to say, God bless you. Have a great rest of the evening. We miss you. We can't wait to see everybody again. Here's this blessing. May you be blessed with good friends and learn to be a good friend to yourself, journeying to that place in your soul where there is love, warmth, and feeling. May this change you. May it transfigure what is negative, distant, or cold within your heart. May you be brought into real passion, kindness, and belonging. May you treasure your friends. May you be good to them, be there for them, and receiving all the challenges, truth, and light you need. May you never be isolated, but know the embrace of your Anam Cara, which means your friend. Good night, all of you, and sleep well. Bye-bye.